Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this panel that will deep the crucial role of Mediterranean partnership with a special effort on the role of CCUS in the Mediterranean basin. I'm Eduardo Della Role, I'm the program chairman of MC Med Energy Conference, a partner of the Union for the Mediterranean in this fantastic Mediterranean pavilion. I want to thank a lot Union for Med for inviting us to become a partner of this fantastic pavilion, and I also wish to thank a lot CO2 GeoNet for accepting to be co-organizing of this fantastic panel on the role of CCUS. I'm sure that the knowledge, the experience and the passion that you have on this argument will for sure give a great contribution on opening discussion and a very wide perspective on the energy for try to find solution in the fastest mode as possible. It's an honor for me to be here in this prestigious location and to be partner for the first Mediterranean pavilion ever. And we want to be a really partner of this initiative because Mediterranean area for IMC Med Energy Conference is real our DNA. We started 30 years ago debating on energies, finding the Mediterranean the perfect area to debate about energies. Our debate 30 years ago was about to find solution to find more affordable, more secure and more clean energy to Mediterranean area and to Europe. The same paradigm of today. For sure the solution, both technical and perspective, of 30 years ago was completely different. We started about to expand the gas network offshore. Then years by year, new technology, new perspectives comes on, and as OMC Med Energy Conference, we follow this evolution, embracing all the new contribution from renewable, from alternative solution, from CCS, from biofuels or bioenergies, because there doesn't exist a single magic silver bullet to find the solution for a clean, sustainable, affordable and secure energy. We have to explore this collaboration, this holistic view in a very enlarged perspective, because only with this holistic perspective we can find solution really in a pragmatic way that able to arrive to the common goals as fast as possible. Why the Mediterranean have this role? Mediterranean is historical being the junction between the north and the south, the east and the west of cultures, but also of industry. And if we tackle the climate change goals, this is really an opportunity to work together to explore new paradigm in the energy sector. That is one of the most important sectors to be addressed in terms of GHG reduction, involving both African and European countries to support both short-term resilience but also long-term perspectives. But this needs to integrate skill, to integrate know-how, supply chain, and find viable solution. Engaging stakeholders, but also different actors, from energy producer to energy consumer or hard-to-abate industries that need anyway, that share anyway common paradigm in the transition. Industrial emission for sure can be reduced through electrification, through switching, but for sure CCS is a lever that the industrial sector cannot leave in a corner, especially for the hard-to-abate sectors. CCS, so CO2 carbon and storage, has a key role in meeting the climate target in this region. And for sure there's a growing interest in the Mediterranean basin, for sure driven by the experience of Northern Europe, but Mediterranean basin have for sure a great geological potential and can contribute having both potential producer to offer new solutions, but also to activate cross-border collaboration from moving from a classical one-way direction to a more cooperative way, exchanging not only goods that could be gas, electricity, but also CO2, but also experience, knowledge, sharing of opportunities, and this really can be the area in which Southern Europe and North Africa can share their ambition on accelerating the transition, also using CCS solutions that in other areas are already put in place to accelerate the path to decarbonization. I don't want to steal any other minutes for this very interesting panel, so I leave the floor to CO2 GeoNet in the person of Sabina Bigi that will moderate this panel. Thank you so much for being here, and I hope that as a Mid-Energy Conference we are able to offer this very holistic perspective on the energy transition. Today we deepen CCS, in the next day we deepen renewables or even more industrial collaboration. So thank you. The floor is yours, Sabina.
Good afternoon to everybody. So this panel is dedicated to discuss about CCS and how CCS can contribute to improve this relationship that are the main characters of the Mediterranean area. That is also a place of where people meet from ancient time. And I would like to present the people of this very gender balanced panel. That is, the first one is Carrie Vincent from BGS and also the president of CO2 GeoNet. And then we have Gularen Turan, which is general manager of advocacy and communication of a Global CCS Institute. Paola Cantelli, which is from Geological Survey of Spain and also member of EXCO of the CO2 GeoNet and association, and Carly Nouvelle, she is co-founder of Climate Action Platform from Africa. So in this way we are going to represent each part, let's say, the north of the south of a Mediterranean area. So I would like to give the floor to Carrie Vincent for the first presentation. She will speak about the role of CCS as climate change mitigation action.
Hi, so it is fantastic to be here at COP, where such important work is being done on climate, and I would like to thank OMC for inviting CO2 GeoNet to co-organise this event with them. So I wanted to talk to you today about how CO2 storage is a flexible and ready-to-go technology that is one of the key options to help us meet our climate challenge and achieve net zero by 2050. So CCS, or CO2 capture and storage, uses proven technologies. So capture has been undertaken on a commercial basis since the 1930s, CO2 transport and storage since the 1970s. So we already have great experience in these technologies. We know how to apply them, we know how to use them, and we can put this together to make a complete CCS project. We should also mention direct air capture, which gives us a new exciting opportunity for negative emissions. And unfortunately, as we see that we get further and further away from meeting our climate targets, we see that we need negative emissions more and more. And of course, Mother Nature can show us the way, because we see CO2 trapped in natural reservoirs. So there's also something we can learn from nature in terms of CO2 being trapped for millions of years deep underground. So when I talk about geological storage of carbon dioxide, I mean CO2 stored deep underground at a depth of around 1 kilometre in sandstone reservoirs. So it's a bit like the CO2 being stored in a big sponge. And over the top, we have to make sure that we have a good thick cap rock, so something like a shale, a rock that will not allow the CO2 to come back to the surface. So we take a lot of energy and a lot of time to make sure that we find the right places to deploy CO2 storage. In terms of the costs, so there are a few projects at the moment that are looking at this on a more commercial basis. And we see, for example, the Longship project in Norway, the costs are estimated to be around 55 euros per tonne of stored CO2. For the Clinker project, which is looking at CO2 storage from cement plants in Europe, the estimated costs were 50 to 73 euros per tonne. And for the onshore US, the estimated CO2 storage could be between $5 and $6 per tonne for CO2 stored in depleted oil or gas fields or saline aquifers. So we see that the price is very affordable and a very small incremental cost compared to the cost of doing nothing. So how can CO2 storage help us meet our climate targets? So it can enable a significant and rapid reduction in emissions now. It's something that's ready to go. It's something we can capture the CO2 from any large point source. It can be used on multiple sectors, so we can apply it to the power, we can apply it to industry, and we can apply it to chemicals. For some options, like cement and steel, where the CO2 is part of the process and the chemical processes react to make CO2, it's the only option available. So although we can decarbonise the energy using renewables and other clean fuels, when the CO2 is part of the process emissions, CCS, CO2 capture and storage, is really the only viable option that we have at the moment. And CCS also offers us the opportunity to offset hard-to-abate emissions. So some of the other sectors will be very difficult to reduce emissions. So agriculture and transport are more challenging, and here CCS can also help play a role by helping offset emissions. And of course, CCS offers negative emissions when coupled with direct air capture or bioenergy using sustainable source, of course. So the IPCC special report on pathways to 1.5 degrees saw a role for CCS. They thought that we needed some kind of carbon dioxide removal on the order of 100 to 1,000 gigatons, which is a huge amount of removals to do. And they saw a role for bioenergy with CCS, direct air capture, and they saw that in the 1.5 degrees pathways with no or limited overshoot, which means we don't miss our targets by too much or we go over a little and then come back down, energy has a high share of low emission energy sources and needs renewables, CCS with gas, and coal decreases to zero. And in terms of industry, we saw emissions being reduced by using recycled carbon feedstocks, but also by using CCUS to make sure that we recycle carbon as much as possible and store the carbon that we don't need. And I wanted to offer you two perspectives. So this is from the International Energy Agency, and they see CCUS as key in the clean energy future. So they see in their first part of their assessment period between 2020 and 2070, they see CCS being applied to industry and power early on, and later on shifting towards removals and offsetting. So they see a continuing role for CCS. It buys us time for a sustainable energy and just transition, but it also can be part of our future, and it's one of the options that we have to look at this. And it is very important to note that there is no one solution. We have to have all of the technologies. We have to be more efficient. We have to use renewables. We have to reduce waste. We have to do everything. And the longer we leave it, the harder it becomes to meet our targets. And I also wanted to offer an exciting perspective from the Global Cement and Concrete Association, who see CCS playing a major role. This is where the CCS, CO2 is manufactured as part of the process emissions, and here we see it as being essential to use CCS to reduce to net zero by 2050. So just to point out that, are we meeting our climate targets? Well, sadly no. The sixth assessment report says that we are not on the pathways looking to achieve 1.5 or not even 2. At the moment, the implemented policies say that we're not doing enough. We need to do more, and we need to do more in all of the options that we have to tackle climate change. So, from the GCCSI report, I loved this quote very much, which is why I used it. So it was noted that some 40 million tonnes of CO2 are captured and stored every year, but this must increase by 100-fold by 2050 to meet the scenarios laid out by the IPCC. So I think it's a really important to understand the challenge. One of the other reports that I saw that I really liked was they commented that in the pandemic in 2020, we all just stopped doing things. We stayed home, we didn't go out, and you could see the drop in our emissions. And if you looked at how much our emissions dropped in the pandemic when we stopped, you then realize that we have to do that every decade for the next 5 or 6 decades to achieve our climate targets. That just tells you the scale of the challenge that we have ahead of us. So we really have to apply all of the solutions, and I really believe that CCS is one of the options that we have to use. CCS is growing. This is the good news. So the global CCS report, which I'm sure we're going to hear about, will tell you that we are getting many more projects. I see some exciting developments like the Ravenna hub in Italy, and of course we had the Insala demonstration project in Algeria around the Mediterranean region. So we do have some experience of CCS in this area, and I think we can really grow this to help achieve our climate targets. And I think it could be another hub for storage. So we see the North Sea developing as a storage hub, and maybe we can also see the Mediterranean develop as a storage hub, because we see that there is lots of storage potential around this area, and we just have to develop it. So how do we grow our CCS? How do we grow this exciting option? So CCS can play a key role in a just transition. We see it developing as hubs and clusters, so we see a network of CCS projects developing. Each one of them has something to teach us. And how do we learn from this? So we need more real projects. Every project teaches us something new, gets us closer to achieving our climate goals. We need clear governance, and we need clear and consistent policy. We need to know that CCS is here to stay. And initiatives such as the EU Storage Directive help tell us that this is here, it's something that we're doing, it's something that we're implementing, and it's something that's here to stay, something that we can use to help us tackle our climate challenge. We see we need financial mechanisms that give us a level playing field and consider the benefits of using CCS to help us achieve our climate goals. It gives us energy security. It helps us manufacture more cleanly commodities such as cement and steel that we need to build infrastructure, that we need to build renewable energy infrastructure. So it's a real part of our future. And I would like to thank you very much for your time and attention.
So, thank you, Carrie. And now we pass to the second one. It's Gloria Turan. So please, she will speak about the development of CCS in the Mediterranean region. You can say that. Yeah, it's okay.
Thank you. And I am expecting a few slides. Thank you. Firstly, thanks a lot for inviting us. It's a pleasure to be here. For those of you who are not familiar with the Global CCS Institute, we are an international think tank that aims to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage as one of the key tools to tackle climate change. Obviously, as Carrie said, we need everything. We need renewables and energy efficiency, but we also need CCS. So my comments will be in 3 parts. Firstly, I'll talk a little bit about the global status of CCS and also the status of CCS in Europe. Then I'll zoom in on the Mediterranean region and talk about the work that has been undertaken to assess the potential for CCS and to progress CCS. And thirdly, I'll give some examples of projects that are currently under development. So, as Carrie referred to, our flagship report is the Global Status of CCS, which we release every year. And we released the 2021 report a month or so ago, and it's available on our website. So if you're interested, I'd encourage you to go and take a look. Currently, we have 30 commercial facilities around the world in operation. So CCS is not a technology that's at the experimental stage. It's very much real, and it's been happening for over 50 years now. Those 30 projects have the capacity to capture and store more than 40 million tons of CO2 per year. And in addition to those 30 that are in operation, we have some 140 plus facilities in various different stages of development, some 10, 11 under construction and others in various different stages of development, with a capacity to capture and store potentially 250 million tons of CO2 per year if we develop all of these facilities in the pipeline. And as you can see, the growth since 2017 has been impressive, and in fact, year on year in 2022, the pipeline grew by some impressive 44% per annum. One of the key drivers of this growth in CCS, which is also quite relevant in the Mediterranean region, is the rise of CCS networks. So in the past, CCS projects were basically a point source, a dedicated pipeline connected to a dedicated storage site. But now we're seeing more and more multiple industrial emitters using the same shared storage and transport and storage sites, which basically enables scaling up of infrastructure. It lowers risks and it lowers costs. And hence the sort of CCS networks have risen to be the preferred method of deployment around the world, and we expect to see that in the Mediterranean region as well. When we look at Europe, currently there are more than 70 facilities in various stages of development across Europe, and what I'd like to emphasize is that this figure is like almost, actually more than doubled since 2021, so significant momentum all across Europe. EU Innovation Fund has been a key driver. It's investing in 11 CCS and CCU projects. Noted that I mentioned the Innovation Fund twice, clearly very excited about it, but also countries like Denmark, Netherlands, and the UK, which is where I'm based. The governments are putting significant support, policy support and funding support into CCS projects. So where does, coming to the Mediterranean region, just taking a step back, at the Institute we've developed what we call Readiness Index and Requirement Index for CCS. This was first created in 2015. We looked at 50 countries around the world and ranked their attractiveness for CCS investment. So the Readiness Index is composed of 3 components. There is storage, and it's the endowment, the availability of storage resources, as well as the state and knowledge about these resources, which is something that we can come back to. Countries' policy environment, and each country's legal and regulatory framework that is of relevance to CCS. And we've also, as I mentioned, developed a requirement indicator, which is basically based on a country's emissions and how big the fossil fuel industry is in terms of both production or consumption. So if a country is a major consumer or producer of fossil fuels, its requirement index will be high. This is just to give the context for the next slide. So this is how CCS readiness looks in the Mediterranean region. And sorry, I know it looks a bit small, but I think as one can imagine, within Europe, Norway, UK, Netherlands, and Denmark have the highest scores. But a number of countries, which wouldn't surprise you, also score quite highly from a CCS readiness point of view, countries such as Spain, France, and Italy. But what may perhaps surprise you is, for example, a country like Croatia is also ranking highly on this index. And in fact, we're hearing on the grapevine that some exciting developments are taking place in Croatia as well. And perhaps what is not as surprising again is that Egypt is sort of ranking lower on the readiness side. But again, we've heard one of our members, Mediterranean Energy Partners, is looking to assess and develop CO2 storage potentially in Egypt as well. So here is a sort of an instrument to assess how countries in the Mediterranean rank in terms of their need for CCS and how attractive the CCS environment is from a storage policy and legal and regulatory point of view. Now here is another important piece of work which has been undertaken by OGCI, Oil and Gas Climate Initiative. They looked at globally, they looked at more than 250 places, hubs, where kind of there's significant opportunity for large-scale emitters to come together as a hub with, they also identified potential storage sites in proximity to these emission sources, the emission hubs. And as you can see, they are looking small on this map, but quite a few emission sources all dotted around the Mediterranean, including North Africa as well, and of course in Southern Europe, all across Mediterranean. And I've listed the resource. It's a great tool. If you go to their website, you can use and download the information from there. So, which brings me to what is actually happening. I'll give a sort of examples from a couple of projects. The first one that we've already, I think, heard about, it's been alluded to, is the Ravenna Hub, which is led by ENI. And the hub aims to become the reference hub for Italy and the Mediterranean. Storage will be offshore depleted gas reservoirs in the Adriatic Sea, and it's going to come online in 2 phases. The first phase being much smaller to pilot and demonstrate the technology and get it up to scale. And phase 2 is scheduled to start around 2026-27, capturing with a capacity to capture and store around 4 million tons of CO2, half of it from ENI's own emission sources, including power stations and a hydrogen plant. In the East Mediterranean, Energean, again a member of the Global CCS Institute, is pursuing the Prinos carbon storage development. I think they've estimated, it's the pre-FEED stage. They've estimated that they've got around 100 million tons of total cumulative CO2 storage capacity, and once they scale up, gear up, that they're hoping to capture and store around 6 million tons of CO2 per year. I think what's important is Energean have also identified 20 fields with storage, CO2 storage opportunities across 6 of its countries of operations across the Mediterranean region. So they think that this is a scalable business opportunity for them. Last but not least, I'll come back to what Carrie was closing her remarks with. Significant progress, but there needs to be a lot more done. We need to scale up by at least 100 times. This is showing the IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario Outlook. In that outlook, they estimate that we'll need to get up to around 6 gigatons of CO2 captured and stored, and of course also through direct air capture by the mid-century. And we need stronger policy to incentivize rapid CCS investment. We need policies, governments to put in place policies, businesses to build, own and operate these, and of course the finance sector to finance these projects. So great momentum, but lots more to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Guluren. We now go ahead with Paula. She is from the Geological Survey of Spain and CO2 GeoNet, and she'll present the results of a research activity on CCS in Europe into European project.
Thank you. Wait, that sounds loud now. So, what is pilot strategy? Pilot strategy is a 5 years European Union funded that has the objective to support the development of carbon capture and storage in the south and east of Europe. We will do it with deep study of proposed pilot sites in 3 regions, in Paris Basin, Lusitania Basin, and Ebro Basin, in lower detail in Upper Silesia in Poland, and in Greece and Macedonia, because they have a lower detail right now, so we go to try to move them to the next step. So the final objective, the deliverable from this project, will be pre-investment proposals, 1 for each of the 3 regions, and development concept proposal for the Poland and Greece regions. And we, from a technical side, we are talking about deep saline aquifers. But this project started really 3 years before in a strategy CCUS project, also funded by the European Union. And in that case, we work in a regional scale in 8 regions, 2 in France, 1 in Portugal, 1 in Spain, 1 in Poland, 1 in Croatia, 1 in Romania, and 1 in Greece. And what we try to looking for is to really understand from an economic, social, and environmental point of view the potential of developing this CCUS, the full chain, in this south and east of Europe. What we did was define for each of the 8 regions business cases, development until 2050, and we evaluated from an economic point of view. And we also, a next step, identify and evaluate potential transcorridors between, transnational corridors. As an example is what we have done in Ebro Basin in Spain. As you see, we started for information, existing information about the potential structure, use it for CO2 storage. We identify key emitters by sectors and by areas, defining the clusters, defining the existing transport lines or needed, and define the business case. From the capture, transport, also included the utilization and the storage. And we develop a tool for the techno-economic development, and we define this, for example, these KPIs that help us to understand, we done for the 8 regions, what is the situation. So what we realized, and we was very happy, because the result shows that really is viable to develop the CCS in our regions. And the second point that we really be really happy is we had a stronger support from the industry. They really need that we develop the CCUS in our regions. That was the reason because we moved forward and we go to this pilot strategy, studying in detail, 1, 2, 3, independently, 1 in each region, the pilot, and prepare the investment proposal. So from this, we would like to underline 3 points. First, that is more than a technical project. All of you, if you are involved, you know what is the technical side, that we need to study the subsurface and understand the dynamic and static modeling, develop the pilot concept development and so on. But we have also 2 things really important, that is to ensure the safety and performance, and the second is to take in account the social acceptance. And with social acceptance, we mean to talk with the citizens that we will be affected in some other way for the installation of this type of facilities, and listen to them and understand what they need and what we can provide and how can we be aligned and work together. Because if we really want to have success in this type of projects, or specifically in this type, we need to work together in that. The second point is the really important collaboration between research and industry, and the exchange of knowledge between one and the other. And the next point is the multi-criteria approach. This organization of the project always moved to specific areas. And this task, sorry, I say in Spanish, specific task. And this task, we need to go ahead with all of them, and we need to consider from the beginning of the project and involve all the needed stakeholders, but from the beginning, and move forward considering all of them. As an example, this multi-criteria approach, specifically in the pilot strategy for Portugal and for Spain, we proposed from the beginning 2 structures, 1 onshore, 1 offshore. And we decide that in the month 18, that is right now, November 2022, we will decide 1 of them. Follow the rest of the project with only 1 of these structures. What we have done is approach based in the multi-criteria. To have a picture of where I'm talking about in Spain, that is the onshore area. As you will see, is no very high population. In fact, it's one of the lowest population in Spain. There are not too much industry, really nothing. The young people is moving to other areas. The offshore is just the opposite. The proposed structure is around 50 kilometers from the coast, but the coast is really have a very focused industrial side. It's a very old historically city. It's a very tourist area. So for one side, the onshore is seeing the opportunity of the CO2 storage because that can attract new industry because they can store the CO2, they have the storage, the industry can come. The other side, they have the industry, but they need to storage the CO2. So it's two different cases, but both can have seen a benefit on the application. What we have done during these 18 months is recover all the information possible of these multi-criteria. We did a Boston analysis, identify from this multi-criteria approach, and we have to take the decision, and don't want to do a spoiler, so next week we will decide, announce which of both will be. So last slide, just the key thought that we would like to share with you is that the CCUS development in the south of Europe, particular Mediterranean area, is needed, is possible, and is viable. First step, regional approach to identify promising regions and understanding potential, including the social and including the limitation and the gaps from the permits. And we say that it's needed to consider the transnational possibilities because our neighbors should be our partners. Right now, we need to move together and be all in the same boat. The multi-criteria approach is mandatory, and we need to bring on board key stakeholders from the beginning. And finally, a pilot scale requires research and industrial collaboration, social implication, and to have the support and the incentive for the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. And so we can go on with Caroline Well, and she will present how CCS can contribute to a sustainable future for the Mediterranean area.
Thank you so much, Sabina. Oh, the sound is really weird. Can you hear me? I can hardly hear myself, but that doesn't really matter. I'm going to approach this a little bit differently because I don't have that level of depth and research that my fellow panelists have. I want to take you on a journey to 2050. And we managed. The world is at net zero. And to do that, we have maximally reduced our emissions. We have deployed CCS, as I learned from Kerry, at a scale of between 100 to 1,000 gigatons cumulatively. And we have removed up to 220 gigatons ambient from the air and stored permanently in a variety of storage methods. From the perspective of the continent of Africa, we have lifted Africa to middle income status. And that means that Africa is probably dotted with a number of green hydrogen production locations, green ammonia, green fertilizer. We have deployed green steel manufacturing at large scale because the 40% of built environment activity in cities between now and 2050 that happens in Africa needs to be powered with African primary resources. And carbon removal is a massive industry in Africa in 2050. It has to be. It has to be because Africa has some of the best, most cost competitive locations for carbon removal in the world. Whether it's natural removal, and that's what we often think of forests and protecting them and replanting them and peatlands and mangroves, or engineered removal. Because what you need for that is the right geology, whether it's basaltic rock for mineralization or deep saline aquifers with the right cap rock for the right storage. You need massive amounts of renewable energy, especially for that removal component that I spoke about. And ideally, you need very limited competition for that renewable energy, because you don't want to get into that complex debate of my new renewable energy that comes online, do I use that to take a coal-fired power plant offline, or do I deploy it towards DAX? The African continent doesn't have that many coal-fired power plants relatively, so you have much less sort of moral constraints there. And the way that we have been able to get Africa to middle income status by 2050 is by creating energy access for everybody. It's one of the levers. Currently, 600 million Africans don't have reliable access to energy. But wait, we deployed all that energy towards DAC and CCS, and I just said, oh, that's great, and we give, how does that work? Should we not first give access to energy to people and then actually deploy the industries? Here's another beauty in my vision. I'll get to the complexity in a second. But the other beauty in the vision is that by deploying industry at large scale, you create anchor demand that makes investment in renewable energy bankable. The reason the massive renewable energy resources in Africa remain largely untapped is not because nobody retail wants that energy, but there's no investable business case. And large-scale industrial demand creates exactly that business case. So access to energy and industrial demand go hand in hand in a beautiful way. The only way to get to that vision, one that gets us to net zero in an equitable way with the African continent at middle income status, is if we insert and include the African continent in the development of these industries now. If that develops first elsewhere, there will be a much bigger hurdle to deploy the technologies and deploy the finances towards Africa than there is now. There are big hurdles. I won't lie to you about it. I'm sketching a vision here. I'm not sure that it will be reality. There are big hurdles already, but those hurdles are only going to get bigger if we follow the traditional approach of building an industry in Europe and the US first, and then when it's completely mature, maybe potentially think about moving it to the continent of Africa. It's young enough, it's new enough that we're at a bit of a level playing field from a knowledge perspective, and we can deploy this where it makes a lot of sense. So let me zoom back into where we are now and where we find ourselves, and specifically in the Mediterranean area. The African countries of the Mediterranean area are only 28% of the Mediterranean area emissions. And if we take Egypt out of the picture, we only have 15% sitting in Africa. So relatively small portion of the emissions and a lot of renewable energy potential, and probably quite a bit of storage potential and a lot of oil and gas industry experience. When we looked at that readiness score, what you didn't call out was Algeria, that's set at 33. Okay, fair, below the European countries that were in the 40s, but not the 13 of Egypt. We have something there. We actually have an existing demonstration project that started operating nearly 20 years ago when the CO2 stayed on the ground. So my invitation to all of us is, when we say Mediterranean and when we look at this industry, take the bottom part of the Mediterranean into account, collaborate and grow the industry there and in the rest of the African continent, because then maybe we can make my vision, which I hope is shared by many of you in this room, happen by 2050.
Thank you, Caroline. So we are going now to the question and answer session. And I would like to thank all the speakers for this interesting presentation. And that in any case suggests that CCS could be one of the, can have an important role in the development of industrial sustainable area, the sustainable development of a Mediterranean area. And I would like to start this session with asking if there are any Any question from the audience? Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Abdel Zabout. I'm from Morocco. Originally, just moved to Morocco, and I'm expert in CCUS. And I delivered yesterday a panel. I was panelist in how to implement CCUS in Africa and in Morocco, basically. And then all of you said actually the story that Africa should be part of the solution now, and I basically delivered the same message as you said. Africa has high renewable potential, basically. Morocco, and I know the south of Spain as well, they have the same potential of a cheap renewable energy. Of course, CCUS is not on the table of Morocco now. Probably, I mean, they are driving more green hydrogen and renewable energy, but direct air capture, back, many other technologies, they can be, basically, they can drive the demand, and they can create value on the African side. And we need to involve basically those to include them in the project. And I have a question to you: is that a pilot project funding mechanism, is that something that is only for Europe, or I know Morocco is part as well of Horizon Europe, Horizon 2020, but I'm not sure through which mechanism those pilots can be funded, because it could be probably potential for storing CO2 in a number of African countries, but nobody has looked at, because nobody see the potential of such a growing industry. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So how we see, we will apply specifically in our areas for the legal point of view, for the frame, because we need to identify also permits and so on. But of course, the process could be applied everywhere. That is the reason because we started in the strategy CCUS, identifying potential in regions, and we apply in 8 different regions, so it can be applied everywhere. And the second step is identifying the most promising region or structures from all of this point of view, of course, can be applied. And it's very important also, I think, the transnational corridors. Because, for example, in this study, we saw that in some countries, they don't have enough storage space, and they have a lot of emissions, and we saw how will be economically to move from one of the countries to the other. And it's something that in the vision of the Mediterranean area, we need to consider how we can build a hub in the Mediterranean area, in the South Europe, North Africa, for the CO2 storage.
Please, Carrie.
So I would also like to add to this that we see funding opportunities with the World Bank and the African Development Bank. And so, for example, I worked in South Africa. There was a UK fund as part of the World Bank, and I think it was like 10 years ago, we looked for the potential for a pilot project to prove the geology in South Africa. And I was very excited to hear at the panel where you spoke yesterday that it is moving forward. And it was wonderful to work there and to see it growing. And it was funded with international cooperation and knowledge sharing. And I think that is a good way forward. And it just shows that the road to achieve CCS sometimes takes some time, but it's worth doing. And we have to start now to make it a reality.
Any other questions?
Hi, my name is Sandra from Iceland. I have a question to, both of you on the mapping front. Do you have any feeling on the storage capacity that is now being mapped out in the Mediterranean? How it is in comparison with the emission sources? I mean, are we anywhere near where we need to be?
Yes, so I was talking with Paula about this beforehand because I was looking to see what storage capacity estimates we have. And it's important to note that the capacity estimates are not all the same. Some of them are more mature than others. So I will comment on the Spanish example because they have a national storage atlas, and they estimated that they had much more storage. So they looked only at onshore storage saline aquifers, which was only part of their opportunity. And they saw that they could store over 60 years worth of emissions just in the closures that they identified. And this was without looking offshore, this was without looking at oil and gas fields. This means that they have much more storage capacity. In terms of European storage capacity, even with the estimates that we have now, which are not fully mature, we see more than double the capacity is available to help us meet our climate targets. So we have the storage capacity, but we have to move it from potential to storage. And I've been involved in a couple of small scoping studies to go from desktop to CO2 in the ground, and I've learned it is very challenging to go from something that is in theory to something that is real CO2 in the ground, but it is very satisfying to see it come into reality.
Thank you, Carrie. There's any other question? Okay, I have one to Lorraine. I would like to know how to compare the potential of the Mediterranean area with the experience of other places in Europe. For example, the experience from the North Sea. What do you think if there are some similarities or differences between these two areas?
Sure, and also coming back to your question about sort of storage potential, I was in Oslo a few weeks ago, and there was a big European Commission's forum, and the Norwegian minister was saying that Norway has capacity to store 50 years of all of Europe's emissions. So that's quite impressive. But I think kind of in terms of storage, there's a lot in Iceland and the kind of carpet technology. There's a lot in the Mediterranean. But the distribution, and as Kay was talking about, I think there's something to sort of, there's potential, and some of that potential kind of is better assessed than others. So I think there's perhaps more work to be done in the Mediterranean region to assess and to develop those storage resources. When we look at Northern Europe, there's been more of a longer and more dominant history of oil and gas industry in places like Norway and UK and Netherlands. So arguably they've been sort of a few steps ahead of Southern Europe. But certainly I think there seems to be a lot of potential in Southern Europe, and particularly developing the storage in a timely manner I think is going to be critical. One more point I'd like to make is and again this was referred to, transboundary shipment of CO2, in particular hub and clusters. There is the London Protocol, which basically used to forbid transboundary storage of CO2, but then it's been amended. But it still needs to be ratified by quite a number of countries, and there is its preliminary application is allowed. But if Mediterranean is to kind of really see CCS scaling up and the hubs being developed, I think ratification of London Protocol by more countries is going to be quite important.
So, thank you, Gulrain. And I would like to conclude with a question to Caroline. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. I had a question for Caroline as well. So I couldn't agree more that Africa should be included in what's happening now, not later. But if you could elaborate on what's the best way to go about it, and also when it comes to what all countries are struggling with to a level at least, regulatory framework and the long lead time of projects simply because of these man-made processes.
Thank you. There's always a bit of a risk when you try to talk about Africa, because it's 54 countries and it's like super diverse, and then we're looking at many sort of storage solutions and removal solutions. So I may not answer the question to everybody's satisfaction, but let me give it a try. So firstly, what in general is needed, I would say are two things mostly, and then I'll get to your regulatory question. The first is to the point made here around research on storage potential. If you compare some of the Mediterranean to some of the North Sea, and we heard Mediterranean is not as well mapped, you can imagine what that looks like on the African continent. About a year ago, I think it was RMI that put up the first map for green hydrogen potential, and it literally, Africa was just white. And people were looking at that going like, does that mean there's no potential? And our mind was, no, we just don't have data. And that's true, and that's true for storage to some degree as well. We can't afford for that to be the answer. So what's needed is a concerted effort to look for storage, and probably not by trying to map the entire freaking continent, but actually by looking at where are the places where we can have traction, where there may be a point source emission that's interesting, where there's already a forward-leaning government that is trying to accelerate their renewable energy potential, where there's appetite from investors, and sort of, we're beginning to see an emergence of something. Can we start honing in there whether we have viable storage? Or if you have the beginnings of knowing that there is some storage, double-click there instead of just trying to sort of blanket cover the entire continent. The second thing that is needed to make this happen, and I can't bang the table on that enough, because it's such a different perspective from how energy systems develop in the global north, is concurrent development of supply of and demand for energy. An energy-hungry industry just cannot say, I'm only going to come when there is electricity, because the electricity is not going to come unless there is anchor demand. And if we don't come together and develop those projects and invest in those projects in conjunction, the opportunity will forever remain an opportunity. We'll always be around the pool saying, no, you go first, no, you go first. We need to hold hands and jump in together, because otherwise this will not happen. Now, to your point on regulation, and that's where I get to it last, because it's where granularity is the most important. I can give an answer for maybe one Kenyan county, and that is not at all relevant for Libya, right? What is true in many African countries is that there is less regulatory clarity than in many other locations, but there is actually also an ability, and in some countries a willingness, to move really quickly and change that. And not everywhere, and I can't stress the importance of granularity there enough, but I don't know if any of you actually picked up on the big announcement that was done by Kenya and Fortescue Industries, Future Industries, earlier this week. They announced a 300 megawatt green ammonia plant, a contract. And about 2 weeks ago, we met with the Fortescue team, and they didn't know they were going to announce a contract. They thought they were going to announce a letter of intent or memorandum of understanding, because Kenya just ushered in a new government. They just had elections, and yes, they had had conversations with the previous government, but elections, new government, we have to start again. And they met with the president, and the president said, why are we looking at an LOI? I thought we had agreed all of this with the previous government. Let's make it a contract. And what is it that we need to make this a contract? Now. And that kind of pace is much more possible in certain emerging and developing economies when there is the political will to do it. There are settings on the African continent that are much slower and much harder to navigate than settings in the global north, but there are also settings where all things nicely come together, and you can concurrently shape these kind of things. And it's about the collaboration between the different partners that know those different aspects, and then smartly picking our first places to go so that we pick winners and we can build on successes.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. I will go to conclude this this session with some conclusion from my president, Sister Janet. So please, Carrie, can.
So I hope that you enjoyed our event. I hope that you see that CCS is real. It is here. It is a key option for us to deploy in order to meet our climate targets. And I would like to thank everybody for contributing to this event that was prepared jointly by OMC and CO2 GeoNet. And I will not keep you from your dinner any longer. So thank you very much, everybody.